you?
Good. How you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. Come on in. So we're going to continue this conversation. We just heard a little bit from Laura, who's been reporting on this, the Penn State hazing case involving many young adults in a difficult situation. You and I were just talking briefly about kind of the incidents. You read the report. I read part of the report. Difficult to hear. And what you do is you've worked directly with teens for over 15 years. You also have your master's in marriage and family therapy. So you've had a ton of experience dealing with teens and families. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about dealing with young teens, so kind of middle school to high school, and how to talk to teens about social pressure, how to talk to teens about alcohol, and go from there.
Okay.
That's what we're going to do today.
All right, I will certainly try. It's a big topic, and it's really more like 30 years.
So an extensive background.
Yes, and right now I work for Rhode Island Student Assistance Services, and we place master's level counselors in middle schools and high schools throughout Rhode Island. We're in about 45 middle and high schools throughout the state, and the counselors are highly trained, and they're there, right there on the spot to work with young people in the context of their environment when they're really right there under the pressure, the social pressures that are there for them.
And this is an extremely difficult topic, and so we wanted to tackle it from multiple angles. So we're going to talk to you about the young adults, kind of those middle school, high school years, and then we're going to bring in another expert dealing with those collegiate years. So kind of tackling this from multiple angles today. So you're a mom, you're a counselor, and you're someone who helps people in difficult times. Just putting you kind of in that mom position, that counselor position, before we get into the expert position, kind of what's your take on the Penn State case?
Well, I can't comment exactly on the case. I'm certainly
just
attorney.
kind of the situation.
As a mom, I'm raising 4 kids. I have college-age kids. I've gotten the 2 a.m. phone call, and an absolutely horrible phone call. Once it took me about 20 minutes to process.
Yeah.
Which one of my children this is about, and I call them children. They're young adults, but their brains are not fully developed. Your brain's not fully developed until you're about 25 years old. Maybe it's even developing past that time. So young people are in a position where they're having to make decisions, but the connections aren't all being made. The brain's developing from the back to the front. Of course, this is what I had to think about as a parent, and I know this as a professional, that if the brain is developing from the back to the front, then the frontal lobe is your critical thinking, not your judgment. And so the inner brain, the emotional brain, is developing first. And in terms of the social pressure, I know in this case, of course, I'm not going to indict any of my children. I have 4, so you can guess. And I actually got that phone call, and I thought it was about one child, one young adult, and it was really about another. Because in my mind, it couldn't possibly be.
Couldn't be that one.
Couldn't. And I have to say, I know a lot of the right things to do. I know about what parents need to do, which is give a very clear no-use message. There was some research that came out of actually Penn State. It was, I think, a dissertation from a PhD candidate. And it showed that parents who gave that very clear, consistent, no-use message and had consequences that were clear, and they communicated that to their children on an ongoing basis. It's an ongoing conversation. Their children, their young adults, fared better. And they followed them up through early college years, up through at least their freshman year of college. And so those strong messages do make a difference, and the research shows us that parents matter. Parents have a very strong influence over their kids. The surveys tell us, I think the primary reason that kids choose not to drink or do drugs is they don't want to disappoint their parents. It's one of
That's one reason I didn't ever drink. I didn't want to get in trouble. I didn't want to disappoint my family. I know that's a strong thing. So let's talk a little bit about, we're sending kids out to graduation parties right now. You're going to prom. You're going off to college. So many kids are headed out to college right now. So let's talk a little bit about when teenagers are going to face places where they're going to encounter alcohol, where they're going to deal with social pressures. How do young people make good choices? You've told me you can prepare them but not scare them.
Yes. Right. Scare tactics don't work. Kids actually like them. They're fascinated by scare tactics. But the preparation, again, knowing that the brain isn't fully developed, and we're expecting them, they look like adults, and we're expecting them to make decisions where there's actually also research that shows that young people, kids are more vulnerable to peer pressure. Actually, adolescents are more vulnerable than adults, and they're more vulnerable than children to peer pressure because of the way the brain develops. And they're at a place where the brain has this neuroplasticity, so all these neural connections are being made, and so what's happening is the peer pressure itself, it's kind of a normative thing. They're supposed to connect with others, and they're supposed to try something novel. Anytime we do something novel, we're stimulating our brain, and we're developing, and that's part of normal adolescent development. So, I don't want to lose my train of thought in terms of your question.
So, and you mentioned you want to scare them, but
right.
you don't want to scare them.
So we do pre-prom assemblies, and that's very appropriate. It's because it may last just that evening. Where someone is speaking, we certainly bring in. I know our agency, we have counselors who do a lot of prevention activities in schools. They're doing Red Ribbon Week activities where they're raising awareness about the brain development, or as well as about how different drugs might affect you. So education is important. It is one of the components, actually disseminating information like understanding about the opioid overdose epidemic, and understanding, kids don't always know that, alcohol, of course, you can overdose on. It's a very tiny molecule. It's very dangerous for the brain. And they know that maybe 1 drink of alcohol equals 1 drink of alcohol, but 1 drink of alcohol plus 1 Vicodin equals 5. So there's a synergistic effect that happens, and we need to educate kids about those kinds of things. So that's an example of maybe information dissemination, but there's a lot more to it. Education alone really isn't enough. Connection, monitoring, parents monitoring. I think a lot of times parents think as their kids get older, I can let go a little bit.
Yeah, give them the responsibility.
Right, and we want them to be responsible, and this is a little strange, but yesterday I was in a high school, and the person who greeted me at the desk was chatting with me about teenagers, and she said, well, they got to fly, but if, you got to teach them how to fly, but if you don't warn them, and if you don't give them the parameters and give them the limits, then they're not going to recognize that the high tension wires are there. They're not going to know how to avoid them. So staying connected with them, letting them know what the dangers are. I think a lot of parents don't realize they can give that strong no use message, and that goes with schools too, because our schools do a good job giving that zero tolerance policy. And if you communicate that policy, communicate it to parents, and we support those kinds of policies. And there's breathalyzers at the prom. You give those kinds of messages, but I think parents need to know it's also okay to say, if you are in danger, it's okay to call.
So setting up, you suggest that setting up a no use, no tolerance, but if something happens and you or a friend is in trouble, you do have a drink, or someone does use a substance and you're in trouble, call for help, call a parent, text,
talk to another adult. Another thing, I know our counselors talk to parents all of the time. No judgment on parents. It's really important for parents not to be defensive. I've made lots of mistakes, and I'm supposed to be an expert.
It's hard, right?
Very hard.
I'm not a parent, but I know it's hard.
Yeah, and we need.
So I'm not a parent yet. Well, I'm not ready.
Perhaps
too hard.
But we need to rely on each other. We have lots of community partners. We work. Rhode Island Student Assistance Services works with the Substance Abuse Prevention Coalitions. There's 7 of them throughout Rhode Island, and they consist of, there's law enforcement that are on there. There's parents, there are teachers, school administrators. We work closely with school social workers and psychologists, and we depend on all of these people to look out for our kids, educate our kids, and let them know that if somebody's in trouble, speak up. And that's when in doubt. We're professionals. We can work with kids confidentially, and And it's an absolute delight to work with kids, even when they're struggling. We do a lot of sort of motivational interviewing where we're kind of working with them to ask them about how they think. Get to know how a teenager thinks, how they come to the decisions that they make. There is research that shows us that kids, if you slow them down, they can make good, healthy decisions. They're just much more apt to kind of go with the peer pressure, the social influence, if they don't have the time to really think. So lots of practice, and we do classroom presentations where we help them build peer resistance skills.
Okay. And you mentioned that you want to set that no tolerance, but if you do need help or your friend needs help, to call. And there is the Good Samaritan Law when it comes to drugs and comes to substances, but is there anything with alcohol? So if there's a teenager who's been drinking and is in trouble and has something, which likely in a situation like the Penn State situation, I don't know, I wasn't there, but maybe they didn't want to get in trouble. So if there are kids in Rhode Island who have been drinking and someone has overdosed on alcohol, they don't want to get in trouble. Is there anything like that with the Good Samaritan where if kids are scared, they're going to get in trouble, so they might not call for help? Is there anything in the works like that you know of?
That is a great question, and the Good Samaritan Law applies to opioid overdose, and I don't believe it does apply to alcohol, but I do believe it's in the pipeline.
Okay.
I think we're going to see that very, very soon, and it's really essential. It's essential that we give all young people that message that they're not going to get in trouble. And I heard someone from the Department of Probation speak recently at one of our high schools, and he said, to the kids, the difference between ratting somebody out, okay, you're ratting somebody out, you're protecting yourself so you don't get in trouble, is completely and totally different from, calling for help, speaking to an adult, somebody who can make that clear judgment as to what to do. And that is completely different, and that saves lives.
Yeah,
and that's what this is about.
And saving a life is saving a life.
Yeah.
So if we can arm youth, if we can arm ourselves with the right tools to be able to save a life, I just think that's so powerful. You said also when we're teaching to use teachable moments. So if it's a terrible story, if it's a terrible incident, whether it's a drinking and driving crash or whether it's a case like the Penn State hazing case, can you use that as a teachable moment for your child or for a classroom?
Absolutely. And there, my heart goes out to the family in this case, and we see a lot of tragedies that occur, whether it's someone who dies or there's someone who becomes injured. And I think that's where we kind of need to be available to our kids and really ask questions and listen. Listen to kids. The Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, their national campaign was talk early, talk often, and listen. And that's why it's awesome to be a counselor, because that's what we get to do.
That's what you do. Yeah.
And as a parent, I try not to be lectury. It's hard. It's hard. But taking those moments and hearing what the kids have to say and not being afraid to hear what they have to say.
That's critical, not being afraid of what they have to say. Let's talk a little bit about just how young people's brains, you talked a little bit about how young people's brains develop, but just a little bit about social influence, because I think it's so interesting when we talk about peer pressure and we talk about social pressure in general. Talk to me a little bit about just understanding that peer pressure is a normal thing, because I think it's hard, as we're adults, you're like, oh, peer pressure, but as a teenager, it's just what it is. It just is there.
It is, and it is really very different. And from, as an older adult, it's hard for us to wrap our heads around it. And I've heard people say, the average 9-year-old is smarter than the average adolescent. But that is because, again, those connections are being made, and they need to be drawn to novel ideas and novel activities. So getting kids involved in healthy risk-taking. Risk-taking is normative.
Okay.
And so getting kids involved in healthy risk activities where they are stimulating their brain. And that might be as simple as asking somebody out for a date, for somebody who's really nervous or shy, or it may be as, sort of edgy as, bungee jumping. No, that might be a little too risky for me. But theater, music, art, you've got all those neural connections going. But the other thing, and I know that there was a researcher out of Temple University, and actually wrote a book. I think it's Lawrence Steinberg. And he talked about how I think it's important that adults are involved in these activities. So people do complain that kids are overstructured and they're stressed out, and we absolutely do see that. However, also having structured activities where there is an adult present, at least, hopefully you have someone whose brain is fully developed and can make those critical judgments. And like I was about to say, that we're professional counselors, and our counselors are highly trained, so we can talk to kids confidentially. And we're not telling the school administration the details about what we're talking to kids about, but we're allowing them to talk. But we know when we have to pull out all the stops and make sure that a kid is safe.
Exactly.
And this time of year, the kids are really stressed, and we do see some major mental health problems, and we see kids making some unhealthy decisions, and we need to make sure that they're safe.
And it is a very tough time of year. It's a tough time of year when it comes to stress. Let's go back to that risk-taking idea. Having your kids involved in activities, how much can they benefit? If I think of putting yourself in activities, whether it's sports, whether you mentioned a theater, or just being involved in some type of activity. I think you mentioned in an email to me responsible internet activities. So whether stuff like that, it made me think that if you're in some type of club or organization or some type of activity, whether you're in middle school or high school, you're forced into situations where you have to make tough decisions. And so you're forced to make decisions which have consequences. And to me, I thought this through, and the more you're involved in those activities, the more you're put into decision making, which I feel like later on in life, whether you're put into difficult social situations, you're then developing those skills. How true is that? And how important is that?
I think it's very true. Practice makes perfect. So the more that you're practicing, I want to call it social emotional learning, whether it's in sports, take sports as an example. There's a lot that you can learn there. Being competitive, raising the bar for yourself, cooperation, and you can learn compassion. Of course, sometimes it goes the opposite way.
But it's so true. You know, sportsmanship. I mean,
right, exactly. And so you're practicing that over and over again. And you know what? There's no guarantee. Again, that if that frontal lobe doesn't make that connection with the emotional brain and that reward system, adolescents are really sensitive to reward, and there's a whole dopamine thing that goes on. And I know that's kind of the buzzword right now, but they're being with other teenagers and getting engaged with other teenagers is rewarding. There's a dopamine squirt. And it's rewarding in the anticipation of that. If you think about somebody who does drugs and they anticipate that reward, for an adolescent, being with their peers and getting that approval from their peers, that's a dopamine squirt. Actually, research shows kids will speed if their friends are in the car more frequently.
So just kind of curious based off of that, do you think we're in a situation now where we're kind of in that everybody gets a trophy situation? Is that setting kids up for failure in the future? I mean, I know that's a whole conversation on its own, but if we're not encouraging kids to take more risks and we're giving out, kind of a trophy to everyone, and we're giving out dopamine to everyone, is that setting our kids up to not take more risks in the future?
That's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. I'm not a huge fan of everyone gets a trophy, but I'm a very big fan of empathy and compassion and making a practice of really, being attuned to another human being. And I think that the case that stimulated this conversation really, makes us think about, where's the humanity? and what happens, and and so I don't know. I think it's great to have something to aim for and the bar raised for you, and I think that's a gift that you can give young people, is to have high expectations. And I say this to parents all the time, and we give presentations to parents at schools, and that if you raise the bar for kids, they will reach for it. That's a gift that you give them, and expect positive decisions. As a matter of fact, statistically, most kids, most of the time, are making healthy decisions. And teenagers tend to overestimate the bad decisions of their peers. And you see headlines, they tend to be negative information, and we're drawn to that. We're supposed to run away from it, but we are drawn to that negative information, and kids certainly are. And you have a classroom of kids, and you often don't hear the kid, you hear, "Oh my God, I got so wasted last night," and then that kind of gets around, and so kids sort of are thinking everyone's doing it. And I think the last statistic I read from an epidemiological report in Rhode Island, there was about 13% of Rhode Island 12 to 17-year-olds used alcohol in the past month. So alcohol use is down significantly, and younger kids want to be like older kids. So we need to give a lot of positive social norming messages. What is the social norm? We have an awesome youth leadership program. We have Students Against Destructive Decisions. We have a Varsity Athletes Against Substance Abuse program where those kids are role model athletes, and they're highly screened, and they go to middle schools and they talk to the kids, and they don't do the scare tactic thing, but they just talk about who they are, the kinds of decisions they make. They talk about their mess ups, the mistakes that they've made, and their humanness, and really try to just connect with the kids. And they talk about the other kinds of activities they're involved in.
I like that.
Kids who are into ballroom dancing, who also play lacrosse.
I like that. So before you go, I'm going to have you scoot over a little bit, and then I'm going to scoot you out.
Okay.
So before you go, Colleen, you are with Rhode Island Student Assistance Services. Where can people go to find more information? Because you have so much within your program. People can come to you for all kinds of different help.
Yes, so it's www.risas.org, and we've been in operation for 30 years, and we are funded by the Department of Behavioral Health as well as school departments. We've got highly trained master's level counselors in 45 middle schools and high schools throughout the state of Rhode Island, and we're there really for the purpose of substance abuse prevention and early intervention. We're trying to delay the onset of substance use among kids, and we're trying to prevent the development of substance use disorders, knowing that these kids are young and their brains are developing, and we're trying to help them along the way. So we're right there at the time where they're making those decisions. And so you can certainly contact your student assistance counselor in your school, or contact our agency for more information. And what I miss?
I think that's great.
Okay.
I really appreciate it. I appreciate you being able to come take time out of your day and to continue this conversation. I think having the conversation with young adults and teenagers is so important, being able to help them make good choices as they move forward in their lives. And it's good to hear that alcohol in young adults is down in Rhode Island, but a whole host of other things that we need to continue to work on and push forward for teens to make healthy choices and adults to make healthy choices too.
Right.
So Colleen, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate the conversation and look forward to chatting with you more in the future.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it.